Hi, my name is Flavio Penna. I'm from Nemus, and I'm watching the Break It Down show.
Yeah, this is crazy. Sandra, why don't you introduce Flavio and what Nemus is? Because I have no idea what a Nemus is.
I would love to. I've been working with Nemus for a few months now, and I love what their mission is about. They're essentially helping to save the rainforest and doing that with the technology of Web3. So it's a very exciting space, and there is all sorts of new innovations that are happening. And Nemus is really one of the companies that is advancing those innovations, both in Web3 and NFT minting and with regards to conservation efforts and saving the planet. So it's really exciting to be a part of what Nemus is doing. And I'd love to, hear from Flavio about maybe your journey to starting Nemus. I know you have a lot of on the ground experience in Brazil and have been building businesses for a while. What led you to start Nemus and discover the power of Web3 to make such huge impact in the world?
Oh, that'll be a long story, but I'll try to keep it short here.
No, talk all you want. It's an hour.
Okay. No, I always tend to say I've been a tree hugger since I was a kid. I would say I was a radical activist environmentalist when I was young, and went out and always had my opinions on how we should preserve the forests and everything. But I've basically had a business career. I have a business background. I did an MBA. I've been working originally in the financial markets, and then I spent the last 25, 30 years restructuring companies in financial distress. And about 10 years ago, we ended up in the Amazon with two companies there that were bankrupt and in financial distress, working with sustainable forestry and reforestation. And we took them over, and that brought me to, I guess, a closer look at the Amazon. At the time, it was in a state called Acre, in the middle of the Amazon, right in the middle of the Amazon. And it's the most forest covered state in Brazil. But over the last 4 or 5 years, even that has started to change rather dramatically, because I think with the world price of beef and commodities, a lot of the farmers in Brazil have started moving up north towards the Amazon, looking for cheaper land that they can clear cut and plant. And that's accelerated by the local populations that are also looking to make some sort of income. And whether that's cutting down, 20 acres to have 5 cows, that is an income. That is an additional income for them. So that sort of like brought to my attention that something has to be done on a scale, because we have a lot of people working in the Amazon trying to protect the Amazon. But I think it really, for you to have an impact, it has to have scale. And that is sort of like I'm bringing my business experience in that of sustainably viable businesses. And what caught my attention really was the growth of Web3 and NFTs. And last year, really at the beginning of the year, it started off when my son calls me up and says, "Hey, Dad, I made some money on Dogecoin," and I was sort of, I bought Bitcoin years ago when it was like $100 or so, made some money there, but I hadn't heard of Dogecoin, and I looked at Dogecoin and I said, how could this little dog be worth $54 billion? There's got to be a way that we can bring this power of massive amounts of people towards an interest or towards something that makes sense to them, and use that for conservation. So that was really the birth of Nemus. Was, okay, I have the experience in the real world, and we have to be able to see how we can leverage this in the tech world, in the social media world, and everything. And 1 year ago, I didn't have a Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or anything. And then we partnered up with Charlie in New York, and since then it's been just a fantastic journey with my learning how the tech world works, how Web3 is really such a dramatic instrument for us to do something really, really impactful in the Amazon. And on my side, my experience in actually implementing things in the middle of the boondocks, we say, where there is no infrastructure, no energy. I mean, you basically have to start a lot of things from scratch if you want to make them economically viable. And that's really sort of like where it started off to get to Nemus where we are today.
Can we define a couple of the terms? Because one of the things that folks are still going to be struggling with for quite a while is Web 3.0 and Web 3. And what the heck is Web 3 got to do with saving the Amazon? What are these tools?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what in the case of Nemus, it's two things I think that are important that we're seeing here. One of them is sort of like the advent of the NFTs. What we've seen in the last year or so with NFTs is they're very much related to either gaming or artistic designs or something in that segment. What we've looked at for Nemus is since an NFT is sort of like a unique either piece of art or something unique. What we've done is we've picked a geolocation on the planet, which happens to be in the Amazon, which we purchased. So each NFT has a unique geocoordinate on the planet, and it's within the properties that we are acquiring for that. In addition to that, and we haven't launched it yet, but we will be launching our own token. So you will have the NIA token, which is the Nemus economic activity token, which will become the currency for you to transact in the gaming of everything that is done in the NFTs and in the platform that we have developed. So we're bringing, I guess, both of those things together. But I think one of the biggest differences is that all of the revenue that is generated from these NFTs goes into the real world to implement economic activity and to bring something to the local communities in the Amazon. So I don't know if I answered your question, but try and explain it.
Yeah, no, it's perfect.
And then NFT stands for non-fungible token. And a lot of people don't know what fungible means. I didn't know for a long time, but it basically means it's irreplaceable. So it's a unique and one of kind asset. So that's why NFTs, they're encoded on the blockchain. That means they can't be replicated. Even if you take a copy paste, it doesn't come with the same kind of utility or functionality that the actual NFT would have. In this case, Nemus's NFTs correspond to these specific parcels of land, and you can actually see what's happening on. And as the team develops this functionality, you'll be able to see what's happening on the ground. You'll be able to become familiar with the fauna, the flora that are in your particular parcel, and then there's a whole gaming aspect to it as well. So it's kind of really cool how NFTs are really bridging the IRL, the in real life world to the digital world and creating these new possibilities that weren't possible, that never existed before, by being able to leverage and really rally all of these people around a shared cause, like saving the Amazon rainforest. So it's pretty exciting what Nemus is doing. And I think that there's a lot of inspiration around the world for this type of model. I mean, we've seen a lot of that actually been happening in Tulum. So it's really cool to see it. I think that that's sort of part of the vision of Nemus as well, right, Flavio, in terms of just creating that inspiration to the world of what can be done with this technology.
One of the things that we often hear about with the climate and all of these things, there's a lot of different things, the ocean, the rivers, everything. And it gets to be a little depressing because we hear about how horrible everything is. Yeah. But I don't think we get to hear enough about the positive things that are being done with technology all around the world. I mean, Sandra, you and I can name several people, Jeremy being one. There's all kinds of people working on these problems. Talk a little bit about the power of technology and how we're trying to tackle these things and some of the good stuff so we can be like, okay, there's people working. Now, how do I help these people?
Go ahead, Sandra.
Me?
Yeah, you.
I'd love to, turn it over to you and talk about, some of the things that are already happening on the ground. I think that what's really unique about Nemus is this collaboration that you have with the people that are there. And you can tell me the stats about how many people live there, but talk about what's happening in Pauini and what the people are requesting and asking for that Nemus is actually able to deliver.
Yeah, I think that's one of the important things that we have when you go to the middle of the Amazon, and in this particular case, our first property is in a municipality called Pauini. There are about 25,000 people there. My guess would be maybe 20 or 30 people actually have a bank account. Most people do not have a bank account. They just go to the bank with their name and an ID to collect the government subsidy that they get once a month. So that's their only experience really in banking. A lot of the business in that region is all barter related. So, you'll harvest a Brazil nut or fish or acai berries or something, and then you'll swap that for gasoline or an engine or something else or food that you need. So there's really a complete lack of technology in this in this region, and and that's exacerbated because you don't have communications either. So, we are talking about Web3 and sort of like the borderline of new technologies in the digital world. And down there, they don't have the digital world yet. And I think that that's where Nemus is going to be able to make a huge difference, because as we bring energy and as we bring communications to these locations, you can very rapidly jump from a location that is purely based on barter to someone that is already adapted to the digital world. And we had some really interesting conversations there with some individuals. So, for example, in the property that we purchased, it's 41,000 hectares, about 100,000 acres. There are 3 small indigenous communities that, for all intents and purposes, they're sort of like squatters on our land, but they will live there for forever. That's how we want to work with them. And one of these communities in particular, there's an indigenous chief there called Silvio Piau, and we spent a couple days with him there. I mean, we spent many times. I've been there for 6 or 7 times in the last year or so. But on the first occasion that we were there with him, and we were asking him, what are the problems that he has, the issues that he has, and I asked him, what would be the most important thing for your community? And his first answer was internet. And I was sort of like, oh, wait a minute. This guy doesn't have a smartphone, doesn't have a computer, doesn't have anything. But when he goes to the big city, which is Pauini with 18,000 inhabitants, he sees the impact that the internet has could have in some of these locations. So today there is technology that is gradually bringing the ability for you to have internet to very remote areas and at a decent cost that can be implemented. So I think that that's going to be a very rapid transition that we will see from a lot of these communities that have no contact with the digital world to jump to the digital world very quickly, because that's going to be sort of like natural, particularly with the young generation. We had iPads and watch the video, and you'll have like 20 kids looking around and watching this TV for the first time in their life because we downloaded a movie from Netflix or something like that. So I think these communities that live along the rivers and in the forest, they're really anxious to have this technology that will give them access. And a case in point in particular with Silvio, I asked him, why is this so important? And he told me his personal story. He said, my father was bitten by a snake and many years ago, and it took them 4 hours to come by boat from where he was to tell me that he was bitten by a snake. It took me 4 hours to get back there. Wow. And I was there, and I just got in time to see him die. And this was 8 hours that if I had internet, I could have, sent a message to somebody and said, can somebody go and save him? Can somebody go and help him? And so even for an emergency purpose, this would have changed my life. And I think that that's just one example of hundreds that you will see in these locations, that sort of technology, which for us, we take for granted in our lives. Hey, you talk to my kids and it's sort of like, do you know what life was without a smartphone? Nah, no, not really. And the smartphone's only been around for 15 years. So it's sort of like something that I think will have a very rapid absorption if we can provide it to these communities. And the way by doing that is really having a viable economic activity that is sustainable using the forest, working with the forest to maintain it and bringing, that level of income so that people can have their internet connection, can have their smartphone, can have their digital bank account, and then start transacting. And instead of just bartering, they can sell their Brazil nuts. Who knows? My dream is selling to an NFT holder directly someday with a QR code that the NFT buyer knows exactly where his Brazil nuts came from.
I love it.
So, and that's, I think the evolution of technology is going to be very rapid over the next 5 years, and we'll be amazed, I think, 5 years from now when we go back to Pauini and say, hey, you remember how it was 5 years ago, and look today. It's I think it's going to be pretty amazing. So
yeah, that value, that understanding where your food comes from, right? That's the big thing that we were talking about. Even 10 years ago, what's in my food and where does it come from? Now we can use blockchain to do that in a number of ways, whether it's NFT or also spraying. We've had a company that talked about spraying cannabis so that if there was a problem, because cannabis absorbs a lot of the nutrients in the ground, you can hyper identify exactly where the problem was instead of crushing the entire crop. Fascinating.
Wow.
Yeah, technology is really amazing. I mean, today, for example, we've been working with a couple of the satellite technology that exists. And with satellite technology today, as you're mentioning in crops, you can actually detect, you got 1,000 acres and the farmer looks at it and it looks absolutely beautiful, but the satellite can detect where the leaves are actually slightly larger than in another location. So he might have 100 acres of his property that are a little bit behind. He won't visually see it, but the satellite technology sees it and can give him this information so he can do micromanagement of his crop and increase the productivity. And then if you add that on to, for example, what we've been doing now in our Genesis drop for our NFTs, we're having high definition drone footage of all of our properties so that the NFT holder will have, and we can send you some pictures and for you to see some drone image. You can virtually count the number of trees that exist in your NFT to the point where you can tell if it's, a sumauma tree or a Brazil nut tree or an acai tree. And it's really amazing the level of definition and also the cost. I mean, if you talked about this 10 years ago, it's just not viable. And today the cost, obviously, as it's all digital, it gets less and less expensive as time goes by, so that you can provide this to people faster and faster and higher resolution and more information. So I think it's amazing. I think what's happening in technology in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I just wanted to clarify one point. The NFTs they do not represent ownership of the land. Nemus holds the land in trust. They represent the parcels of the land that you're actively participating and contributing to the conservation, the protection, and the sustainable economic development that Flavio has been talking about. I'd love to kind of hear, maybe if we could dispel some of the myths that we constantly hear about what's happening on the ground in the Amazon. You talked about, some of the squatters that are within the Nemus drop that that Nemus is actually working with. I mean, talk a little bit about what we hear versus what's real and on the ground there.
Yeah, I think one of the myths that we hear is that, there are large corporations that are coming up and destroying the Amazon and setting fire to it and so forth. But I think what people forget is there are about 20-some million people that live in the Amazon today. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's a melting pot of people. I mean, many times people will turn around and say, "Oh, can you take some pictures of the indigenous people?" And you expect to have half-naked individuals, all colored and everything. And Silvio walks up to us with a T-shirt and pants, and he doesn't wear shoes. He doesn't like to wear shoes because he prefers to be barefoot. But it's sort of, and he's married to a non-indigenous individual. So there's a lot of mingling, I would say, of people from all sorts of locations in Brazil and even internationally. So that's another thing that happens. I think one of the things that we see also that is a partial destruction of the Amazon is that a lot of these individuals, they're basically subsistence farmers. So, if fishing is okay, they can survive on fish and hunting and so forth. But a lot of them are just sort of like, I've got to improve my life, or I've got to pay for my family that's growing. So they'll go into anybody's land. They'll invade somebody's land as a squatter, and they'll cut down, 10 acres, 15 acres, and buy themselves a cow and a couple of cows. And then after 2 or 3 years, they don't have any 3 cows anymore. They've got 10 cows. So they have to clear cut another 10 acres. And the reason that they have to continue cutting down more and more acreage is because they don't have any resources to improve the quality of the soil and have a high productivity of cattle. So a lot of the farmers or the squatters that we've found on our property, we've got 14 squatters on our property. Most of them are very small squatters, that have maybe 40 acres, 50 acres. And what they do is, every 4 or 5 years, they'll cut down another 5 or 6 acres. I'm going to get some additional cows, and I want to plant something. So they'll plant manioc, and first year, the soil will accept it. The second year, the productivity is down to half. And the third year, it won't produce anything. So you have to cut down a little bit more. So if we can bring that level of technology, and we're doing that today, we're doing a lot of research on, improving the carbon content in the soil so that you can increase the productivity of the soil. And a lot of these squatters, what we're talking to them is say, look, if you've got 40 or 50 acres, how about you keep 20 acres, have like 5 times more productivity than you have in the 40 acres, because we will bring this technology and we will work with you to develop this technology so that you can, increase your income 5-fold. And then on the other half of the area that you've clear cut, why don't we do a reforestation of parica or some kind of tree that eventually could have some commercial value, but we're reforesting and increasing the soil quality in that area. And most of them, I would say, the first reaction is one of sort of like being very suspicious, because I would say over the last decades, everybody that comes there and promises them things basically is going there to take things away and not to bring them. So we have to prove ourselves by actually delivering on what we're promising, and that takes time. It takes a lot of patience. You're working in an environment where people are really very suspicious of anything that you do. But once they see things happening, and I believe if today somebody goes to Pauini and asks, what do you think of Nemus? I would say most people will say, hey, we want more. Please come. We want you guys to be more active, and obviously we've started just relatively recently, but I think we will make a very significant impact in that area. So
one of the things I learned from working on the ground, and you talking about the chief stuff I've seen before, we as Americans, in my case, in the Army or the State Department, we come with these solutions. We're like, hey, we know what the answer is to your problem.
Yeah.
I would I'd be like, hey, what's the smallest problem in the world that we can solve right here today? And it's the simplest things. It's like, hey, the road over there is rutted and it's ruining our vehicles when we drive over it. Could we fix that some way? And it's not these grand things. It's the very, very basic things.
Yeah.
I also know that when we bring in our solution, a lot of times, like if it's reforestation, like, hey, let's put whatever breadfruit plant over there because that's a good crop and it'll help. How do you convince people that doing the right thing is the right thing, as opposed to just, who cares, I'm going to go cut more that way and not worry about what's behind them? That seems to me like a hard problem to solve.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because if you talk to most of the people in the communities that are living there, whether it's in the city of Pauini or the 90 some communities that are in these locations, a lot of them, at least their speech is very environmentally conscious. They are of the view that we have to preserve this, and we have to look at ways that we can increase our income by preserving it. I think, though, as a counterpart, is what they see is that sometimes they will see a slightly more aggressive squatter or a land grabber who comes in and destroys 200 acres or 500 acres and puts a whole bunch of cows there. And then all of a sudden, this guy's the wealthy guy that downtown, he has the gas station and he has a construction company and so forth. So that's an incentive for me to destroy, because this guy 10 years ago, he wasn't rich and he just invaded somebody's property and cut down 1,000 acres. And today he's rich. He's one of the wealthy guys in the city. So there's always that incentive. But I think that incentive can be broken if you show that you can be just as wealthy without having to clear cut, and there are all sorts of other sources of income that can be generated. I think the big problem, though, is that obviously to clear cut, all you need is a chainsaw and a match. So you cut down the forest during the wet season, and now in July and August, we're going to start seeing fires all over the Amazon because it's the dry season. They wait for it to dry and then just set fire to clear it up and then put cattle there. That's very cheap for you to do, particularly if you're invading somebody's land. Whereas for you to do something economically viable, let's say, for example, you want to do acai berry or something like that, you have to build a factory. And for you to build a factory, it's $1 million investment. Who has $1 million in this area? I mean, the GDP of the municipality of Pauini is $12 million with 25,000 people. So an investment of $1 million would be sort of like a dramatic change to the whole municipality. We're looking at building a Brazil nut processing facility in Pauini. That's a $4 million investment. So it's a completely different reality to what people are accustomed to seeing there. But once you have that, they can make a lot more money by harvesting Brazil nuts than they could out of cattle. And so I think that's sort of like we have to convince them by examples and show that, if you do this, this is really what has to be done to preserve the Amazon. The Amazon wasn't built for cattle. I mean, it's not there for you to clear cut and put cattle. There are other areas in Brazil that are much more viable economically, but it's sort of like the cheap way for you to have a little bit bigger income. And that's what happens. But I think, Pete, you mentioned one thing, sometimes we have the impression that, we can come out, we're brilliant, and we're going to tell them what to do and so forth. And we had a couple of examples just recently. We're working with the military police in the region to help monitor this area. And the municipality is about the size of Holland, just to give us a perspective. And there's one lieutenant called Lieutenant Bruno, who is responsible for all of the Holland size area. And he's got 14 people working with him. So you've got 14 law enforcement officers in the municipality of Pauini, in an area the size of Holland, where the only means of transportation are boats, because those are the highways that you find up in the Amazon. And he has a boat, and the engine broke, so they couldn't do anything. They were in a city called Boca do Acre, which is about 7-hour boat ride from Pauini. And so if there's anything illegal happening in the surrounding areas of Pauini, illegal logging or illegal fire or something like that, nothing happens. There's no way that he can get there. So he asked us, could you guys buy me an engine for my boat? And we said, sure. Well, that's one of the first investments that we made. So I was discussing with everybody and saying, why don't we get him a really powerful engine, because then he can go really fast and so forth. And the guys turn around and kind of like smile and say, Flavio, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
If you put a powerful engine, a couple things are going to happen. First of all, during the dry season, you'll destroy it in about 2 weeks, because there's so many logs and things in the rivers on the underbelly that it's not going to work. And then when you go into the small little rivers upriver, you've got so many weeds and everything that doesn't work either. So it's better for you to have, two 40 horsepower engines than one 250 horsepower engine that sounds good, it looks beautiful, but it doesn't work here. So this is the interaction that we have to have with the locals, because they know what works. But at the same time, we know some things that work that they might not know. So, okay, it's not viable for you to have a small acai factory, because for you to be able to make it economically viable, it has to be of a minimum scale for you to get into a store. We have experience in selling products to, if you want to export internationally, you turn to an American company and say, oh, great, we love this product, but we've got 2,000 outlets and I need 50 of these items per week in each one of these 2,000 items. Well, it's not going to be a small little factory that's going to be able to deliver that level. So in the case of acai, as an example, acai rots very quickly once you've taken it down from the tree. So unless you have something locally In one day, you have to process the acai. The only alternative is if you build a barge, a refrigerated barge, that then you can bring the acai from these communities 2-3 days away, and then they can come to the factory and then be processed, things like that. So there are some things that we learn and other things that we can teach from experience, business experience, and from all parties. So I think that that's one thing that really works well in this community. And now with the community and with Web3 and social media, we're talking to people in Australia, in the Philippines, and wherever it is, and they say, we've got an example of something that worked here in the Philippines really well. They did this and they did that, and I think that interaction with practical, results is going to make a huge difference, because very quickly you can test something, see if it works. It works, great. Let's replicate it and build it in other communities, in other areas that we might be. So. And that's sort of like the benefit of technology. It's not a particular technology, but it's at the speed at which technology can be disseminated and arrive to these locations. And I think that's going to be also very beneficial for us.
Just for reference for people, when you talk about the size of that state, you're talking about, what was it, 14 total guys to go out and police this thing?
Yeah.
It's a little smaller than the entire state of Massachusetts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Massachusetts is not
That's
a big
law enforcement,
but it's really big when it's 14 people running around trying to, like, and then the other thing is like, if you do get there with your boat or your truck or whatever, the guy's like, wasn't me, you're be like, well, what am I going to do now? It probably is him. Well, how can I prove this? Like, just whatever it's going to be. It's very, very hard to do these things. And I just want to illustrate the point where you're talking about, like, when you're not there, you can't understand how hard it is to do the basic thing. And so if the answer are twin 40 horsepower engines and one of them is always broken, that's the answer. That's how it works there. And you can't bring in an American solution. You could say, well, why don't we just build an ice house? You're like, well, you have to power an ice house, and you also have to get clean water. Oh, and by the way, anytime you bring clean water in, you have to process the wastewater, and it becomes these big things that you don't think. You just think you have a solution. Way more complicated than that. And it's great to have someone there that can be a guide to help us understand, like, where is the actual work, not 10 steps down the road. Where is the next step right here today?
That's it. No, back in the 80s and 90s, I worked with several NGOs, and I helped them organize themselves in Brazil to raise money to help in certain environmental projects. And we did several things with, I think it was Nature Conservancy, with the MacArthur Foundation, with the Botanical Gardens in Rio. And our focus was bringing money to help protect state or federal parks. And there was this one park that we helped, which was the Parque do Jaú, which I think is 2 million hectares. It's probably the largest park in the world. That's like 5 million acres. There were 2 individuals there to monitor, the Jaú Park. This was before drones, before satellites, before anything. And so we said, they didn't have a boat. They didn't have any kind of energy there. So they were there, and once a month, a boat would come up with food and stuff for them to, and wait until next month. So what exactly are they going to be able to do? Well, any boat coming up the river, the first thing they did was to run away into the forest, because if these are illegal loggers, they're going to kill us, and people will only find out a month from now, and they're never going to find our bodies. So that's what we're going to do. And how do we monitor anything? I don't have a satellite. I don't have a drone. I don't have anything. And if I find somebody doing something illegal, how do I communicate with them? How do I call law enforcement? Am I going to call Tenente Bruno, and it's going to take him 5 days to get up here to find me? People don't realize that just the Brazilian Amazon, I think, is almost the size of Europe. So it's gigantic. And I mean, there are no roads. You don't have the. I remember talking to, I think it was the MacArthur Foundation, and they said, why do you need all of this for this park? And I said, well, in the United States, if somebody invades your property, somebody will call up 911, and the sheriff drive down in his souped up car, and in 20 minutes he's there, and you can do it. Here it takes you like 4 days for you to be able to get any place. There's no helicopter, there's no highway, there's a little boat that gets you up there, and that's it. So it's very difficult for you to protect it in an area so vast that it's almost impossible for you to monitor. And today, what we've noticed is the federal government in Brazil, with the technology and satellite technology, they can detect fires anywhere in Brazil, and they can detect illegal logging anywhere in Brazil. It's very rapid. There's technology that will, just with colors, looking at a screen, you can see where it was yesterday, where it is today, and it's being destroyed. The real problem is, okay, once I detect it, what can I do to stop it?
Yeah.
And what can I do to get there? And they don't have helicopters. The government, Brazil is not a wealthy country. So with an area of this size and such a poor region in Brazil, it's sort of like, where are we going to get the resources to do that? And that's, I think, where Nemus might make a huge difference in the medium to long term, is as we build economic development to these locations that have economic viability, we could provide a helicopter to the forestry police for them to supervise that. So we provide that equipment. They have the law enforcement power. We don't, but we have the equipment that can provide them that supervision and that monitoring capacity. So I think that's also a long-term benefit that we can bring to this.
All this stuff, the stability stuff you're talking about, it's vital to understand that, you might think that you're just the police and you have an authority, but power is the authority, right? And you show somewhere, and your days from anybody helping you, like the amount of risk you're going to take on, you're like, I thought you had your cat in the tree. No cat in the tree. Okay, I'm leaving. You have fun poaching all these animals and trees. Not a problem for me. I know. I'll see you later. You can't expect people to do that. And then just to go back to the size of the Amazon, Francisco Orellana navigated from the top of the Andes all the way down to the mouth of the Amazon River. 8 months. Like some of the most biggest, powerful, fastest moving rivers in the world. 8 months to get from one end to the other. It's an enormous hunk of land. It's huge. And to be able to manage it, it would take a lot of people. So how do people help? I mean, how do people get involved with Nemus to support what you guys are doing? We all are desperate to do things for the environment and for the rainforest. What do we do?
So I think one of the differentiating factors that we've created in Nemus is that what normally people do when they want to defend an environmental clause is they will make a donation to an NGO that is working in the area, whether it's a WWF or a Nature Conservancy or whatever. So you get $10,000, you make a donation, and then at the end of the year, you're going to get a report that, we protected the alligators, or we protected this monkey, or we helped work with this community and so forth. But you don't really have a tangible knowledge of exactly where those $10,000 went. And those $10,000, they're a donation. That's it. That's gone. You're never going to get that money back. I think the difference now with the NFT world is that you can buy an NFT with $10,000, and you will see, because of the blockchain, because it's all in the blockchain, because you have these social platforms, because you have this technology showing what is done. As you buy a Nemus NFT that has X number of acres, you will actually see the land that your $10,000 went to purchase, and you will see the economic activity that is being implemented. And you have this information live, real time in some instances. And then if you don't like the work that is being done, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, I'm not comfortable how Nemus is working, or I need the money, you sell your NFT in the secondary market, and somebody else will take on the flag and continue this adventure, or this investment. So I think that technology with the NFT is really what makes the difference. And from my point of view, how can people help is, for one, is if you buy an NFT, it's generating funds for the Nemus project. And these funds go to purchase land and to implement the economic activities. Everything in that field, you will be able to monitor. So that's the first thing that is most important. The other thing is that, in a sense, it's sort of like a savings account that you have. I want to protect the cause, and I've put my money in this business. And as we're introducing the gaming activity, the gaming side of the Nemus NFTs is really an educational process that we want, so people can faster get to know the real world, how it works. Because it's one thing what you might read in a headline or in a newspaper, or see a quick video. It's another thing when you actually are participating in this. So with the Nemus NFT, you will participate in the DAO. You will be able to give your opinion. You will be able to vote on what the allocation of the resources are done. As the economics activities has a return, you will benefit from this return, and the local community will benefit from this return. And you will be able to say, okay, we've got X million dollars left over in our vault, in our treasury. Let's take a vote to whether we're going to build a second unit for an acai factory in this other location, or are we going to buy computers for these 15 schools in these 15 different communities. So I think that's that interaction. It's sort of like it helps Nemus grow as an entity, and it helps the Nemus guardians and the Nemus participants to really feel a sense of ownership. I mean, they actually do participate, and their opinion counts. And that's, I think, what's going to make it so successful in that sense is I want to participate, and I want to know what's happening in my participation. And that's the beauty of technology.
Yeah. And there was a recent release from the Treasury. So can you
Yes.
talk about where those funds, what those funds went to?
Yeah, we did the first test run where we basically sold part of the a small portion of what we have raised in the NFT sales, and we transformed it into fiat money. It was about $115,000. One of the first things that we did was the engine for Tenente Bruno. That I don't know if we posted any pictures of it yet, but we should probably post some pictures of it. But we're doing several things with the local community. So we've hired several people there, including some of the squatters, and they're going to be opening up some trails in the forest. One of the things that we're trying to do between now and the end of the year is in this property that we purchased. And one of the reasons why we purchased it is that about 40 years ago, the old owners of this did a massive plantation of Brazil nut trees. So there are now about 200,000 Brazil nut trees planted in the forest that have grown. Some of them have grown, some of them have not grown so much, but they're abandoned there in 13,000 hectares of the 41,000 that we purchased. These trees are just basically producing Brazil nuts that fall to the ground every year, and they rot because there's nobody there to harvest them. There's nobody there to process them. There's no activity there. So what we're doing now is we're opening up some trails, small trails in the forest, so that we can actually have an inventory of every single tree, every single Brazil nut tree that we have. So, and this comes from my experience in the forestry business in the state of Acre, where every single tree has a GPS location and has a measurement of the size, the height, the width, the girth, and so forth, so that we can, over the years, we can monitor the evolution of the tree, whether it's growing, whether it's died, and that's going to be something that I think will be very valuable for us. The other thing is that, and there's a team of 4 people that are working now in the forest to be able to count those trees. The other reason why we're doing this is that this year, at the end of the year, in December, January, February, is the harvest season for the Brazil nuts. And there are a series of communities around the area that most of them do some Brazil nut harvesting, but with very limited number of trees. So, for example, there's a community called Vila de Meira. There are 86 people who live in this community, and they have 400 Brazil nut trees that they harvest every year. It gives them about $2,000 a year of income for these 86 individuals. That's the level of income. So what we're doing is by having an inventory and a GPS location of all of our trees, we can turn around to the people in Vila de Meira and say, would you like to harvest 5,000 trees instead of 400 trees? And these are the 5,000 trees that you are going to be harvesting. But this is the location. This is a GPS location. Why? Because Silvio, from the indigenous community, he also has 600 trees that his community harvests from. And we don't want any conflict between what he is harvesting and what the Vila de Meira community is harvesting. So we can actually give locations. And it's incredible that people, they view their Brazil nut trees as their kids. And they know, every year they go into the forest, this Brazil nut tree gave me whatever 27 cans of Brazil nuts last year. If you walk with Silvio in the forest, he will tell you tree by tree, every single tree, what he's done over the last X number of years. And it's his babies. I mean, these are his babies, and they generate a part of his annual income is there. So by bringing this technology of GPS location and numbering and inventory and so forth, we can expand their income levels very inexpensively. And I mean, instead of 400 trees, they might have 4,000 trees. So that's 10 times more Brazil nuts that they're going to harvest. And then hopefully by the end of next year, we hope to have the processing facility in Pauini. And why is this important is because today, what happens when they harvest these Brazil nuts, they sell it to intermediaries. And these intermediaries take it to another intermediary who finally delivers it to a factory. Most of the processing of Brazil nut trees is done in Bolivia. Bolivia has 76% market share worldwide. Brazil has 11, although most of the Brazil nuts come from Brazil and not from Bolivia. And so they're selling, these communities, they sell the Brazil nuts for between this last harvest season, they were selling between 60 and 80 cents per kilo. I buy this at Publix here in the United States at $25. You can buy it at a supermarket in Europe for about 32 euros a kilo of Brazil nut trees. So basically 95 to 98% of the revenue of the Brazil nut does not stay in Pauini. It goes elsewhere. And if you have a processing facility there on location, obviously we're not going to capture 100% of this, but we will have volume and the logistics and the packaging and who knows, even a branding that we can sell at a much higher value to the end user. And as I was mentioning earlier on, my dream is I'll be able to sell to the NFT holders that can place orders and say, look, I would like to get a pound of Brazil nuts every month delivered to my house. And with a QR code and our blockchain, I can tell you, it's packaged, you got a package, and it was actually Silvio Piau who harvested these Brazil nuts in this location in the forest. And technology will allow us to do that. So, and obviously with that, you create a much higher income from the local communities because Nemus is a foundation. I mean, all of the resources, they stay within the ecosystem back to the local community. So.
There are a lot of comments going on right now. I'm just getting caught up. This is great, though. I mean, this is how we
from the community, from the Nemus community.
Oh, yes.
I wonder if this can be pushed to a court.
In general, everybody, if you like this show, you definitely should be pushing subscribe on that subscribe. Breakdown show. You got to support stuff like this because we want to support people like, whatever Sandra does, we always want to support them.
Thank you.
These guys, here's the thing about all of these things that are in the nonprofit charity type world. I'm getting ready to do this transnational ride to raise money to fight veteran suicide and help the families after these things happen. You don't have time, then kick in some money so that folks like me can go do the work that needs to be done. That's why we do this. So you invest in Nemus, you find these different areas where if you don't have time, you use your money. If you don't have money and time, you use your attention or you go build some money and time. This is how you help. And just go to Nemus.earth. Let me put that link up here for you. Nemus.earth. And that will make the ability to make a difference, So Nemus.earth. Where's that? See it right over there? Hold on. This finger. It's always backwards. And man, I appreciate you coming on the show and giving us this insight and talking about this in terms of like the development world, because it's hard to do what you're doing and get all of the local folks in alignment and have us not be a bigger problem. That was the thing with Afghanistan and Iraq. We were always the biggest problem, right? Like if we could stop impacting things in a negative way and just get a few things right, you could start to, and it's impossible to do, but you can start to stack wins together. Figure out what that sheriff's, limitations are for their job and how do you help with that? Ask them what their problem is and then bring in some of the expertise, some of the technology, those kind of things. It's great that you're doing this.
No, I think one example, I think somebody was mentioned, I saw something passing by there, is when we talk about the corporations or large investors and so forth, I think in the medium term, we want the NIA token to become an actual token and a stable token so that it can be used for this commercial interaction with the products that we are producing. But one of the things that has happened is we've been approached by several large corporations interested in carbon credits, because what we are doing is basically our focus is not obviously generating carbon credits, but it's sort of like a byproduct of what our activity is. I mean, we are purchasing land, we are restoring degraded land that is there. We are working with the local communities, and in our case, almost all of the money that is generated from the eventual sales of carbon credits goes back to the communities, which is not what happens in the vast majority of cases with carbon credit certification today. It goes to the large landowner who says, "Hey, great! I made a lot of money with this forest that I'm protecting." And obviously the certifiers and developers also make a significant portion of this money, but not a lot of it goes back to the local communities. In the case of Nemus, and I think that's something that will attract a lot of the larger corporations to come into Nemus, is because they will be able to see that almost all of the money that is generated from the sale of carbon credits goes to the local population, goes to the improvement of the standard of living, and it goes to really protect the forest, because at that point, the local communities realize that, this is what really makes it worthwhile, is protecting the forest, because that's what's bringing the wealth to this location. And so I myself have to become a guardian, as well as the NFT holders are guardians. We have to be all a part of this same community that protects the forest. So we've been approached by some very, very large institutions, and we're working on how this can be done over the next many years as sort of like a standard process where we can guarantee a certain number of tons of carbon credit, because the demand is just gigantic. I mean, when you talk to some of these major corporations and they tell you, "Oh, well, I need 50 million tons a year for the next 10 years of carbon credits," I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh, does anybody have any idea what it takes for you to be able to certify and provide 50 million tons of carbon credits?" It's a lot of work, but then it's a lot of money as well. So there's a lot of focus in the wealth that is going to be transacted. And in a sense, it's going to be a transfer of wealth to the areas that are threatened. So, but it has to be done in that way. I mean, the way I see it, okay, if you are a large corporation that is a high polluter and you have to pay a penalty for that pollution, the money that you are paying to offset as a carbon credit neutral company, it should go to the local community, and not just to make somebody rich in some other location just because he happens to own the land. It has to go to improve the quality of life of the people that are in these threatened ecosystems. And you mentioned early, the oceans and so forth. We've also been approached by a group looking at replicating sort of like a mirror Nemus for oceans and mangroves and coral reefs. And I'm actually talking to a group that's very interesting. We might have some news on that front soon, because it could be an interesting couple of drops not even in Brazil, in another location that is highly threatened with lots of mangroves and coral reefs and everything. So
keep me on the loop. Yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting things that I've seen about Nemus is that this is really a model, a spotlight that can be shown on the Amazon and what can be done with this new technology that really, it's a new world we're entering in terms of the ability to build community, to gather community around a cause. Also the art, which is, at the heart of the movement as well. And the beautiful art that Ben Kwok has designed for the Nemus NFTs. And really to when you buy a Nemus NFT, you decide where that particular parcel is going to be. So you can also even connect, IRL with the people around you that are buying parcels in the same vicinity. So it's a really cool use of Web3, of this ability to accelerate awareness around this topic, gather all of this interest, and people that do want to make a difference, people that do want to make an impact, are passionate about leaving the world a better place for future generations to gather together and rally around this cause, and then also show other places around the world how it can be done, right? This is just one example of how you can use Web3 to, create a massive conservation movement in the Amazon. And, 41,000 hectares, I don't know how many total hectares are in the Amazon. I mean, it's
420 million.
okay. It's still very small. It's still small, but it's big in that it's that spotlight to the world of what can be done. And, the more projects that see this and take the inspiration and run with it and create their own models that are similar in the same footsteps as Nemus, the more that we can do, to save our planet, which is absolutely necessary. It's kind of like we're finally able, as ourselves, without the help of governments, to really take that power into our own hands to enact change.
Yep.
Anything in closing it off, Flavio?
Oh, well, I think one of the things that I think is important, and sort of like just to finalize it, is that it's hard to sell, it's hard to explain to people that what we're trying to do is bring real world solutions, entrepreneurial solutions, business solutions, in the form of a nonprofit organization. So this sort of like, well, how can you do both of that? And I think that we found a way to do it. Is basically we need the entrepreneurial spirit and the business experience of people to implement real world activity by using the technology that is behind it to leverage the ability for you to do these things, and for people to be aware that I understand that a lot of people have a lot of problems with large corporations and so forth. Well, hopefully Nemus will be a gigantic corporation, where the big difference is that the beneficiaries of this gigantic corporation are the local communities and the threatened ecosystems. And that's really why I think we're going to be different in that sense.
Sandra, anything in closing before I roll these final credits?
No, I just would encourage everyone to go over to Nemus and to mint. First, you mint a ticket, and then you actually choose and mint your parcel. It's a great way to get into NFTs, to gather around a cause that we all believe in, and to start your journey into NFTs and Web3.
I love it. All right, stand by, you two. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for